Well, I think Berlin is such a nice town and the weather is so nice. Some of us, our colleagues, are lost in sunshine. I will take the first step here in the afternoon with a short travel report. I will not talk to you about Berlin, my native town, but I want to talk about Riga. And not only talk about this town, but within Riga, I want to talk about one building. Tell you the story of this building, what I think can tell us a lot of things that we are faced to with our questions between modernism and today. Welcome to Riga in Latvia. For your overview, Riga is the biggest town in the Baltics. It's a town near the Baltic Sea. It has a harbor town, and in the middle, in the very middle of the town, the core of the city, there's a square, and in the middle of the square is a building. There's a black cube there. That's the building I will talk about. Riga did not suffer from right-range destructions during World War II, with one but fatal exception. During the city's occupation by the German Wehrmacht in 1941, the church St. Peter was hit by bombs. The church's tower, featured Europe's largest timbered spire, was caught in fire and collapsed. A 120-meter-high giant flame crashed down to ground. From that fire, nearly all buildings standing around had been destroyed. Riga lost its neoclassical town hall and, even more important, a famous ensemble of buildings centered by the Black Hat's house, a building famous for its magnificent Gothic gable, endowed with statues of the style of Dutch Renaissance. It has been the icon of Hanseatic tradition and, far from any doubt, the jewel of Riga's historical architecture. After the war, the new Soviet administration removed all the ruins until 1948. The clear space was shaped in a completely new form, now featuring housing structures in much wider dimensions. The tenement buildings, erected in the typical shapes of the 1950s historism, constituted a distinctive border of the edge of Riga's old town. The town hall was replaced by objective modern buildings for the technical university. This is the first building of the technical university, and then it was extended by a modernist second building, now the white one, here on the right. A new public square, half marching grounds, half city park, opened up and gave view to the shores of River Daugava. You can see the river there in the background of the picture. Finally, in 1970, on the occasion of Lenin's 100th birthday, in the middle of this vast plateau, a mysterious building was erected. You can see it here. It's an old newspaper picture. Excuse the qualities. Let's look at this. A windowless cubicle floating over two basements, encased with copper sheets, initially in red, later turning into a greenish kind of black. The museum in honor of the Latvian Red Riflemen. They were legendary soldiers who fought bravely within the Tsar's army After the revolution in October 1917, they served as elite troops for the Bolsheviks. The Riflemen narrative played an important role in the founding myth of the Latvian Soviet Republic. Therefore, the building dedicated to them cannot be seen as a museum in today's common manner. It was rather a place of adoration, filled with devotional objects and patriotic propaganda, where the last veterans of the heroic battalions should share their memories with later born generations. This highly symbolic character explains the prominent side of the museum. However, keeping in mind the year of construction, the late 60s, the radically modern shape of the building may astonish, as if Stalin's neoclassicism never had been on the rule. Today's visitors are often given the background story. Architects of the museums, Zintar Strieber and Gunnar Strusis Grinbergs, changed the planning of their own account. They shifted the proposed building as far as necessary from its officially given site, so that the still existing foundations of the lost Black Hat's house would stay untouched beneath the ground surface. Several meters only, but enough to stay the foundings untouched. This kind of story can be heard as well in other cities with radical post-war redevelopment schemes. However, in Riga, the subversive search for an arrangement with the nation's history led to a complicated urban situation. Immediately after Latvia's renewed independence, the town square was to be rebuilt in its pre-war appearance. Modernist university building had to disappear for a rough postmodern copy of the old town hall. You can see the beginning here on the right angle of the picture. After tearing down the old modernist university building. That is the new old town hall. The modernist university building had to disappear for a rough postmodern copy of the old town hall. The ensemble of the Black Hat's house was reconstructed on its historical foundations because they have been rescued with utmost care and is now temporarily the Latvian president's official address until the castle has been renewed. As a small part of the Riflemen Museum would have disturbed the historical monument's rear facade, the entrance wing of the existing building was thrown down with any other further ado. No troubles about that have been reported, because after the end of the Soviet Union, the museum lost its ideological purpose. The black box just stood there without any meaning. The only meaning, well, I found when I came there the first time, it was the biggest billboard in the city of Riga. In order to deliver a new interpretation of the country's past within the last century, in 1993, a private foundation started to organize a museum of occupations of Latvia. Listen exactly, occupations. The aim is to illustrate the history of Latvia and the fate of the Latvian people during 51 years of German and Soviet occupation. The historiographic account starts in August 39 with the Nazi-Stalin Pact, which led to annexation of all the Baltic states, nations into Stalin's empire. The 4 years of German occupation from 41 to 44, when almost the entire Jewish population was killed, including complicity of Latvian Nazi collaborators, are presented in a concise way. But the most emotional focus of the exhibition emphasizes the period of the second Soviet occupation starting from 1944. Visitors learn about the armed resistance by Latvian national partisans, so-called forest brethren, or about the deportation to Siberia. Moreover, the economic and cultural consequences of Sovietization are displayed, such as exceeding industrialization, exceeding urbanization, and demographic, that means ethnic infiltration. The chapter of Soviet Latvia ends with the so-called Baltic Way, that famous human chain in August 1989, which connected Vilnius, Riga, and Tallinn in their demand for independence of the Baltic nations. The Museum of the Occupation of Latvia is a non-governmental institution. In addition to project grants, it receives money from private donations and contributions from Latvian groups abroad. The city administration committed the unused building, still unused until today, unused building to the Red Riflemen Museum to the trust in 1992. Only taxes and expenses need to be paid. Opinions differ whether the prominent modern architecture should be conserved at all. Particularly after the return of the Black Hat's house, the building lost all its, the old museum lost all its urban references. Skewed, narrow, and dissonant, between Black Hat's house and museum, one may not only watch two colliding architectural styles, two totally differing urban visions block each other. This confrontational situation in the very center of the city would be a good story on its own. But the Museum Trust, however, shows no interest in focusing the urban clash of cultures. The wing, the Museum Trust, however, shows no interest. On the contrary, there are plans to increase urban confusion. Believe it or not, the Trust adopted the project of a building extension developed by Gunnar Birkerts, an American architect of Latvian background. The wing, which had been cut before, should now be extended remarkably. On exhibition purposes, there is no real need for additional space. The only reason for the extension is to fit a longer facade for a new symbolic idea. After the dark past, the old black exhibition wing, a bright present shall appear, illustrated by the white cladding of the extension. And there shall come an even brighter future, symbolized by mirror glass panels at the gable and at the rooftop. The Trust budgeted €5 million for the refurbishment, but work didn't come to start until now. Let's see. Culturally educated tourists may be able to decipher this collage of buildings, narratives, and identities as an expression of the city's unsettled history. Native architect Oscar Redberg, however, fears a certain chaos of possible interpretations for his fellow citizens. They seem simply irritated by the official anti-communist propaganda on one hand, and such a lot of fondly preserved remembrance on the other. The postmodern revival of Town Hall Square, with its merry potpourri of architectural periods, has created an ambiguous space in the center of Riga's old town that evades any historical classification. But just maybe this is exactly how we have to imagine the city's identity at the beginning of the new millennium. An identity that is mixed up with not only different but controversial views, feelings, memories.
Thank you very much for your lecture. And may I have a question for the bottom-up initiatives, the local? Are there any specific initiatives from art historians or NGOs that would be interested in this topic?
History work is a very difficult, it's a hard work in Latvia. And as I viewed in this situation, I have been there 6 or 8 times as not only as a tourist, as I had to work there and had friends there and a lot of people to talk with. All people that I talked with said that nobody will be in touch with this fund, with this trust. They are like a closed shop, but they are very important power in the state. They have money, nobody knows where it comes from, but there's money enough to make such projects. I've spoken with the director of this trust, and he explained me also, the pictures are given by him, so it's his program, what he will going to show in this new museum. What my feeling is, when I've been the first time in Riga, the museum still worked in this old building, and I came in and there were only tourists there. No Latvian people, no visitors from Latvia. I'm not sure if there is interest enough in the actual questions, because the city talk in Riga is so predominated in the conflict between Russian and Latvian parts of the inhabitants, that the special questions how to show the history and museum, it will be the 3rd, 4th, 5th range of importance, I think.
Thank you. I'm opening the discussion. If you have any question, anyone?
I have a comment, is that okay? Thank you for the presentation. I just want to add 2 small comments. The first one is that I was always interested, being a Polish, I was always interested in this topic of urban narratives and ideology that is in space, because we do that a lot in Poland, even without wanting. And I have a feeling that on the post-Soviet area, it's impossible to use reason to understand that. To use reason, it's not logical. Yeah, and Riga is maybe I would say it's a clean example, because there is a community of Latvians that have one narrative and Russians that have another. I have a feeling that it's more complicated in Russia because the Russians don't know what to think about history. If you go, for example, to Ulyanovsk, the city of Lenin, the whole city was rebuilt. The whole center was rebuilt for 100 years of Lenin. And it was the pilgrimage point for the whole Soviet Union. So all the school trips were going there to learn about the revolution. And it became completely redundant after the fall of the Soviet Union. So first they wanted to make like a smaller museum of Lenin. Then they wanted to make some sort of a anti-Lenin museum. And finally, they created a museum of communism that is open for the Chinese who are interested. So it's only Chinese going there. It's completely confusing, completely. So this is like comment number 1, that shortly speaking, I have a feeling that this confusion is not an exception, but rather an urban condition on the post-Soviet area in general, like everywhere. If you go to Kazan, you have a confusion between the Tatar and Russian. If you go to Ukraine, you have confusion between different groups. And everywhere I was traveling, there was this confusion and complete misunderstanding between, I don't know, if you look at space, you don't understand what it's actually saying. You have Chinggis Khan Museum in the Lenin Museum in Tashkent. You have a Lenin Museum still functioning in Moscow. My most favorite building in Russia is Lenin Museum in Krasnoyarsk that was built in the 80s and was not finished It was almost finished in 1991, and it was only 2 months left till the opening, so they didn't open it. Then it was standing with the whole exhibition about Lenin, like waiting for the people to come, and it was standing empty. And after 10 years, they decided that Guggenheim, Bilbao effect is what they need. So they created a modern art museum in this space, but they didn't take out the Lenin exhibition. So there is a Lenin exhibition and contemporary art next to it. It's absolutely fantastic. If you go there and you see that there is a Lenin looking somewhere to the east or to the west in his hat, and there's like extremely bad Siberian modern art around, like talking stones, whatever. So I have a feeling this is simply an urban condition. And the second comment I have, sorry for making it so long, but it's a really interesting topic for me. The second comment I have is that Riga is subject to another interesting experiment, because after Crimea, a lot of Russians who don't agree with Putin emigrated to Riga. So there's like a huge emigration of very intelligent, let's say intelligentsia, that is another layer in this layered city. So there's like a layer of Russians, of Latvians, and now there is this migrants from, for example, the Khodorkovsky Foundation has some offices there. Medusa, which is like probably the best anti-Putin newspaper, has headquarters in Riga. So I think that this confusion is going to be even more multi-layered and even more complicated, and I'm looking forward to it.
I'm very happy that you went with me so deeply into that problem, because what you rightly described, the confusion about thinking about history in this cosmos of post-Soviet world. Where will we find better points of beginning a discussion, rather better than these buildings in the middle of the town? And they are, we do not have to invent them, they are there, we can recover them, and we can bring them to a new life, because they are museums, it's their purpose to explain history. Why not begin the new debates on history within this building? The reason that I made this lecture here was the discussion about to throw it away, to demolish it. Now we hope, okay, that will be rescued as a building, but what that means, that the difficulties of the urban space, of the urban fabric, it will stay on. What will, we can be disturbed, we can say, what a terrible situation, or can say, no, it's not a terrible situation, but it's a reason to discuss about. That would be my reason to talk about here.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I have one question. I'm interested, what in your opinion is the meaning of this museum, the contemporary one? If the first one was more like a propaganda tool, the second one, what is the meaning nowadays of a museum, especially when it's like not for a sort of a triumph, but rather an oppression, an occupation, what it would serve for? And I have another question. Do you think the fact that this is a modernist building in the very beginning, rather than a neoclassicist one, helped in some way for the transition of meaning?
Understood. What's the question?
The first question is, what do you think, what in your opinion is the meaning of a museum nowadays? A museum to an occupation, a museum to the current function of the building.
Please don't ask me what I would think about founding a new museum. It's not my role, but I can only say what are different examples of founding museum. And what I have, my looking on this project as a museum is that after 50 years around one kind of telling history, the Soviet kind of telling history, now we have the other telling, and it takes the same radicality as the Soviet spelling of history. And I think we need time to clear between these. There is no one history for all, but what we must learn is how the different partners in the history come clear with one with another on the way via their view on history. And at the very moment, the building is empty. There is a small exhibition, something apart, where they are preparing to coming back to this, but well, 5 million, and I'm not sure if they really will get it. And when Riga was a cultural capital 2 years ago, this was the biggest information kiosk for the cultural capital. Okay, why not? It's a very prominent place. It's the very core of the city. It's more prominent than the town hall. The town hall is left side, but it's in the middle. And on the back side, the president is writing.
It's okay, yes.
Thank you for your presentation. I have only one comment on what we are discussing now. That okay, we are in Berlin now, which has many layers. And if we think about Berlin, we say that yes, it has multiple layers because it's multicultural. And when we turn to Eastern Europe and see these cities similar or not similar, but multiply layers as well, we say that it's confusing. And where the confusion ends and where the multicultural, reading starts, and how is it possible? What's the difference between them? Why is confusing to saw a museum where Lenin and contemporary art appears at the same time? If that is understandable question.
I think the answer is simply identity crisis in all these countries, in Eastern countries. And Germany doesn't have this identity crisis because they went through a very painful but also very long process where they could identify themselves in the history as well. So from that moment they could live together. And Berlin is a good example for that. But also, in the meanwhile, we can still find examples for similar processes. For example, the demolition of the Palast der Republik and replacing it with the Staatsschloss. But it's like 1% of the whole procedure what happened in Germany. But even in Germany, there are examples for that. So, and yeah, we are sort of in an identity crisis and trying to find our ways. I mean, Germany tries to find its ways. Latvia maybe not. Hungary, not necessarily, as far as I can tell. Or we're looking for identity excluding the whole socialist era, which is not necessarily good, but that's how it is at the moment. And also it's because it's painful for a lot of people still.
For me, it's in a little bit point of historical irony, because remember what I told you about the four-story of the building, of the modernist building. The architects put it several meters away from the foundations of the historical, of the rare monument. If they would have built their building for the given place, half of the foundations have been destroyed or so, then if the historical building is to re-establish now, the museum has been thrown away without any question. This small gesture to go several meters away led to this situation now.
Does anyone have more questions or comments are accepted?
It's a question. I would like to continue the discussion from yesterday and take your title by word. So why this building is an example of Soviet modernism for you? What's Soviet about it?
But there's Soviet directives and Soviet money given to it, and it was a Soviet purpose that led to the how to say, to the order to the architects. The architects are the heroes to take this advantage to their own and make it the first really modern building, I think, in all the Baltics. I say, Maria, is it right? It's the first really modern building in the Baltics, huh? It's extremely and demonstrative modern. May it, try to think about the architect's mind, may it be Lenin, okay, but we will do in the first modernist or a modern manifest here now, and they did.
Okay, if there are still.
And I would like to ask the architects who designed the building, they were Soviet Russians or Soviet Latvians? Okay. Thank you.
In Riga, you have quite a big minority of Russians. And what's their opinion about this building? They have another relationship to the existing building?
I don't know. I haven't talked to so much Russians to ask this question. The division within the Latvian actual society is so deep and so clear that if you are in one scene, if you have in one network, circle of friends, you have whether the one or the other. The only way for me to look across this borderline is going to the festivities, to the festivals of one or the other group. But there is no, perhaps there are at school, I have not been on university, but I think in all these grassroots initiatives, NGOs and so, they are clearly one or the other, and I have only been in Latvian NGOs.
So I suppose in several of these countries you have this divided society, and that's why you have also this divided idea of history. You have a divide of history, and that's why perhaps a museum in Russia can be this. You have this Stalin or Lenin history, and then the modern art. And it remembers me a little bit of this in Croatia. You have this concrete flowers from Bogdan Bogdanovic, this monument of the KZ ground there, and I think it's what I know, the only monument where you bring the different histories of the Serbians, Croatian history, bring together. So I really like this kind of museum, but I think it's also it's a new museum, the content, but it's also from this old concrete flowers, the work of Bogdanovic, who made this possible, because nobody could take it for themselves. It's an outstanding symbol of life. That's why it's possible.
I personally have no contact to Yugoslav, post-Yugoslav situation. Well, my opinion is that there's in European surroundings there is no more difficult situation of such like the post-Yugoslavian societies. And I beg your pardon, but because I'm very hardworking and with the Baltic questions that sometimes I lose my orientation, and I never will try to do this again to Yugoslavia because I think I lose my mind. But on the other hand, I think if Europe, in all these difficulties with the different nations or so, shall look on the Yugoslavian example and try to analyze what happened and what is going to happen after this, because and perhaps such examples like Bogdanovic may help with it. I'm not sure, but perhaps it may help.
Maybe it wasn't clear for me that This building is a cornerstone, let's say, in a way, because of, not because of the quality of architecture, but because it was the first one in this region. Am I right?
Was it?
Sorry?
What is the first? What's the question?
Why you think it is so important in its place?
Because yes, I think it is because it's a very early, a very clear modernist figure. It's a manifesto. If you look on history and on art history, and so look at where are the changing points, where are the founding moments, and so on. I think this is the beginning, the touchable beginning of the modern times in the architecture of the Baltics.
Okay, but if it doesn't functioning anymore,
yes,
it's. Maybe we could say it's not a building anymore, it's just a statue or a monument. A sculpture.
That has qualities for a sculpture. The problem is in what is the surrounding. You can take a sculpture, put it to a shed or to it in the middle of the square. And it is both. It's in the middle of the square, but it's on the side.
Thank you.